$10. That's what the small hand clutched inside a worn envelope as the 8-year-old girl stood at the iron gates of Blackwood Manor, her gaze fixed on the mansion everyone in Ravenwood feared. She knew its reputation from whispered conversations at school, knew it wasn't a place any child should approach after dark. The air hung heavy with fog, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine as moonlight painted the overgrown garden silver and black, casting long shadows across crumbling stone paths. Bats circled overhead in formation, their synchronized flight pattern too precise to be natural, as if the very creatures of the night recognized this place as their true home. Mike Hunter sat alone in his study, ancient leather-bound books surrounding him like silent witnesses to 3 centuries of existence, his presence commanding even in stillness. No bodyguard stood at his door, yet something invisible seemed to protect the space around him from intrusion, as if the darkness itself acknowledged his authority. Find the weakness and exploit it. He had taught his coven countless times, a philosophy that had built his empire from the ashes of vampire civil wars. Tonight, ironically, he was the one exposed, a rare moment of solitude that he allowed himself only once each month, away from the demands of his position and the weight of decisions that determined fates, both human and supernatural. A murder of crows settled on the wrought iron fence, their cries punctuating the tranquil scene as fog rolled through the abandoned streets like a living thing. Mike checked his pocket watch, an 18th century timepiece that had survived revolutions, plagues, and the endless march of human progress, and calculated how much longer he could indulge in this rare moment of reflection. The manor had become his sanctuary over the decades, neutral territory where the constant chess game of vampire politics temporarily paused. Here, surrounded by the graves of those he'd once protected and failed, he could almost remember the man he'd been before immortality stripped away his humanity. He watched a stray cat navigate the garden wall with supernatural grace, its eyes reflecting lamplight with an amber glow that matched his own. A simple creature following instinct, unburdened by conscience. The momentary envy this observation triggered was interrupted by a scent on the wind, young blood, fear-laced but controlled, and something else, determination. Time seemed to slow as Rachel Robinson gathered her courage, fingers tightening around her precious envelope, the $10 inside representing 3 weeks of saved allowance and birthday money. Her worn sneakers carried her forward with halting steps, each one requiring more bravery than she thought she possessed. The legendary vampire king had faced werewolf packs without flinching, had stared down witch covens with a smile, had negotiated treaties with ancient demons. Yet something in this child's direct gaze unsettled him as he observed her through the window. Perhaps it was the absence of screaming terror where fear should rightfully exist, or the quiet desperation that seemed far beyond her years. The desperation of someone who had already exhausted every other option and was now betting everything on a monster's honor. Mike noticed the child immediately, his enhanced vision cataloging every detail even through fog and darkness. Something in her determined approach made him pause his thoughts about coven business awaiting his attention in the city. The girl's appearance told its own story. The faded jacket 2 sizes too large, the bruise on her wrist partially hidden beneath her sleeve, the eyes that carried knowledge no 8-year-old should possess. Knowledge of violence, of fear, of adults who couldn't be trusted. She stopped precisely at the gate's threshold, maintaining the boundary between human territory and his domain. A smart child. Most who approached uninvited either charged forward in ignorant bravery or fled at the first whisper of movement. This one understood zones of control, respected power while not surrendering to it. "Mr. Hunter," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady despite the slight tremble in her hands clutching the iron bars. "I know you're listening. I need to talk to you." The boldness of this child, naming him directly, addressing him as if he were merely another adult, rather than an apex predator who could drain her dry before her heart beat twice, stirred something Mike thought had died with his humanity in 1724. He could simply ignore her, let the approaching dawn send her scurrying home to whatever miserable situation drove her here. The sun would rise in 5 hours. She'd have to leave soon or risk the morning commute exposing her nighttime visit. Instead, curiosity, that dangerous remnant of his human past, overtook caution. The gate opened silently, an invitation and a test. If you believe predators like David Robinson, supernatural or human, deserve to face consequences, if you believe children like Rachel and Tommy deserve protection even when it comes from unexpected sources, if you believe courage should be rewarded and evil should not triumph simply because it hides behind family ties, then subscribe to this channel. Every subscription tells us you stand against the David Robinsons of the world. Every like says you believe in protecting the innocent. Every share might reach someone who needs to know they're not alone, that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing they'll ever do. Hit that subscribe button, because some stories need to be told and some villains need to be exposed, even fictional ones. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because $10 in courage changed everything. Your subscription costs nothing, but it means you're standing on the right side. Rachel stepped through the gates without hesitation, her small footsteps crunching on the gravel path that wound through overgrown gardens where marble statues watched with blind stone eyes. She approached the grand entrance where Mike now stood, his tall frame backlit by candlelight that cast his face in sharp relief, all angles and shadows, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. She stopped exactly 10 feet away, maintaining a cautious distance that spoke of intelligence beyond her years. "Are you the Vampire King?" she asked, the question hanging between them, bold and dangerous in the cold night air. Mike inclined his head slightly, a gesture that neither confirmed nor denied, but somehow invited her to continue despite his better judgment. The movement was elegant, refined, a remnant of centuries-old courtly manners that modern humans no longer recognized. Rachel stepped closer then, closing the distance to 5 feet, extending both hands with the envelope pinched between small fingers. "I need help, sir," she stated simply, no tears or dramatics coloring her request. "And I can pay." The absurdity of this child offering payment to an immortal being who owned half the city's real estate and had accumulated wealth across 3 centuries almost made his lips twitch with something like amusement. But the gravity in her eyes that had seen things, endured things, stopped any smile before it could form. Whatever brought her here was no trivial matter. "What kind of help costs $10? He asked finally, his voice pitched low enough that only supernatural hearing would catch it from the street. The question wasn't mocking, but genuinely curious, as if her answer might contain some profound wisdom he hadn't encountered in 300 years of existence. Her fingers tightened momentarily on the envelope before she held it out again, her chin lifting slightly in a gesture of pride that reminded him of himself when he was young, human, and desperate. "It's all I have," she said simply, "but I think vampires value courage more than money." The observation was astute enough to earn his full attention. With expertise born from centuries of reading people, their heartbeats, their micro-expressions, the chemical signature of their emotions in the air. Mike accepted the envelope, noting the care with which it had been sealed. Each crease pressed flat, corners aligned perfectly. The precision spoke of desperation, of something precious contained within ordinary paper. Rachel watched him open it with the intensity of someone whose entire future hung in the balance, her small chest barely moving as she held her breath. Her heart rate elevated but remained controlled, fear managed by will, not conquered by it. Inside lay a carefully folded $10 bill and a note written in the careful hand of a child trying to appear grown up. The handwriting wobbled in places, revealing the effort it took to form each letter. Please make my father stop hurting us. He drinks blood from my little brother at night. He says it's because he's special, but Tommy is getting weaker. Mom can't stop him because he's too strong. You're stronger. Please help us before Tommy dies. The words landed like a wooden stake through Mike's chest, momentarily stealing the unnecessary breath from his lungs. In his world, feeding from humans was regulated, consensual, ritualized, a transaction of mutual benefit, never exploitation. The covenant laws he'd established 2 centuries ago existed precisely to prevent this. Vampires preying on the helpless, turning the gift of immortality into a weapon against the innocent, especially children. Your father, Mike said slowly, his voice dropping to a register that made the temperature around them plummet, frost suddenly forming on the iron railings, is a vampire. Rachel nodded, her steady gaze never leaving his face even as his eyes began to glow with barely contained fury. He was turned 6 months ago. He said it was an accident, but now he's different. He says Tommy's blood is pure, special because they're related, that it makes him stronger. Her small hands twisted together in front of her. Tommy's only 5. He cries every night. The brutal honesty of her testimony was flawless in its childish simplicity. Find the biggest predator to stop the one hunting you. Mike felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, righteous fury mixed with protective instinct toward children he'd never met. A rogue vampire, preying on his own offspring, violating every law Mike had bled to establish. "What is your father's name?" he asked, his tone casual but his presence suddenly overwhelming, the full weight of 3 centuries of accumulated power pressing against the night like a physical force. "David Robinson," Rachel answered without hesitation, burning her bridges completely. "He works night security at the old hospital. He comes home at dawn." Mike's perfect memory flickered through files, records, reports from his enforcers. David Robinson, supposedly killed in a rogue vampire attack his people had been investigating 6 months ago. The body was never recovered, attributed to complete incineration. But if he had survived, hidden his transformation, gone to ground with his family as cover, the implications cascaded through Mike's mind with tactical precision. A rogue in hiding, a security guard with access to blood banks, a predator with built-in victims who couldn't report him without sounding insane. "Keep your money," Mike said, placing the $10 bill back in her small palm, closing her fingers around it with a gentleness few ever witnessed from him. "You've already paid enough with your courage." Rachel looked confused, fear and hope warring across her young face. "But don't you need payment?" "Some things aren't about money," Mike replied, surprising himself with the sincerity behind words he'd never expected to say. "Some things are about preserving what little honor our kind still possesses." He knelt then, bringing his ancient amber eyes level with her dark brown ones, predator and petitioner meeting as equals in that moment. "Go home, Rachel Robinson. Act normally. Don't tell anyone you came here. In 3 nights your father will leave and never return. Your brother will be safe." "How will I know you kept your promise?" she asked pragmatically, a question that revealed how her young mind had already considered the aftermath, the proof she'd need that this wasn't just another adult's empty words. The question earned her something remarkable. Mike Hunter smiled, not the predatory grin he used to intimidate enemies, but something genuine, almost warm, an expression his face hadn't formed in perhaps 50 years. He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a silver coin, ancient beyond measure, stamped with symbols no living human would recognize, a crown of thorns wrapped around a chalice, the original seal of the Vampire Covenant. "Keep this. When it turns warm in your hand, you'll know it's done. The coin will only heat once justice has been served." Rachel took the coin carefully, feeling its unnatural coldness even through the autumn night. She held Mike's gaze for a moment longer, searching for deceit in those inhuman eyes and finding none. Only ancient fury directed at someone who wasn't her, and something that might have been respect. With a small nod that mirrored his own economical gestures, she turned and walked back through the gates, her steps lighter now despite the weight of what she'd set in motion. Her faith placed entirely in the hands of a creature others feared to even name aloud. Mike watched until she disappeared around the corner, her small figure eventually blending with the pre-dawn shadows. Only when she was completely out of sight, her heartbeat fading beyond even his supernatural hearing, did he turn back toward his manor. His jaw clenched with controlled rage as he pressed a button on his phone. The line connected instantly. His inner circle never slept when he was awake. "Summon the council," he said without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Tribunal protocol. We have a code violation, Class 1. The classification needed no elaboration. Class 1 violations involved children, and in Mike Hunter's domain there was no greater crime, no faster path to permanent death. He climbed the manor steps as dawn began threatening the eastern horizon, forcing him inside. Behind him the gates closed with a resonant boom that echoed through Ravenwood like a declaration of war. In 3 nights, David Robinson would learn that some monsters exist to hunt other monsters. And the Vampire King had just accepted a contract written in a child's desperate handwriting. The war room beneath Blackwood Manor had stood for 200 years, carved from bedrock and reinforced with iron and ancient spells. Candles floated without support, casting dancing shadows. Across stone walls covered in maps, territory boundaries, safe houses, feeding grounds, and the locations of every registered vampire in Mike Hunter's domain. A massive oak table dominated the center, scarred by centuries of fists pounding in anger, agreements carved into its surface with ceremonial daggers and bloodstains that wouldn't fade no matter how many times it was scrubbed. Within 30 minutes of Mike's summons, his inner circle had assembled. Elena Volkov materialized first, the 200-year-old former Russian noblewoman whose elegance masked a ruthlessness that had survived palace coups and revolutions. She served as Mike's second in command, his voice when he couldn't be present, his conscience when his rage threatened to override strategy. Her pale blonde hair was pulled back severely, ice-blue eyes already calculating as she took her seat at Mike's right hand. The surveillance footage played on loop across 3 screens, each angle showing the same horrifying scene from different perspectives. David Robinson, pale and unnaturally still, crouched beside a small bed where 5-year-old Tommy slept fitfully. The vampire's fangs extended slowly, almost lovingly, before piercing the child's wrist with practiced precision. Tommy whimpered but didn't wake, compulsion holding him in drugged sleep, his body trained through repetition to accept this violation as routine. 17 feedings in 6 weeks, Marcus reported, his jaw clenched with barely controlled fury. The tracker had spent 3 nights documenting David's patterns, behaviors, and vulnerabilities. He takes approximately 4 ounces each time, enough to weaken but not kill. He's farming the child. Mike's fingers dug into the oak table, leaving permanent indentations in wood that had survived 2 centuries. The mother? Catherine Robinson, trauma nurse, double shifts paying for Tommy's anemia treatments that David insists on managing privately. Vivian answered, her tablet displaying financial records, medical histories, and social media profiles. She's exhausted, gaslit, and completely unaware her husband is undead. David installed blackout curtains claiming light sensitivity from medication. She believes he's suffering from a rare blood disorder. The perfect cover, Elna observed coldly. Sympathy for his condition, isolation from scrutiny, and unlimited access to his victim. Mike stood, pacing the length of the war room like a caged predator. What else? Marcus pulled up additional files. David's been in contact with the Northside faction, Sebastian's people. He's been selling information about our security rotations, feeding schedules, safe house locations. In exchange, Sebastian promised him protection and territory once he's harvested enough from the child. The revelation hung in the air like poison. Sebastian Reed commanded the rival vampire faction that had been testing Mike's boundaries for months, probing for weaknesses, recruiting rogues. David wasn't just a predator, he was a traitor. He plans to drain the child completely, doesn't he? Mike's voice was deadly calm, the tone that preceded executions. Within 2 weeks, according to intercepted messages, Vivian confirmed, he's been storing blood in a hidden freezer at the hospital. Once Tommy dies, David disappears into Sebastian's territory with enough pure blood to sustain enhanced abilities for months. Sebastian gets intelligence, David gets protection and power. Mike turned to face his counsel, his eyes burning with ancient fury. Then we accelerate his timeline. Over the next hour, they crafted an elegant trap. Vivian would leak false intelligence through channels David monitored. An ancient artifact had been discovered in St. Mary's Hospital basement. A blood crucible capable of amplifying vampire strength tenfold. The rumor would be irresistible to someone obsessed with power. Elena would arrange Catherine's sudden overnight shift at a different hospital, a critical staffing shortage she couldn't refuse without risking termination. Rachel would be invited to an exclusive overnight academic program at Ravencrest Academy, fully supervised and safe. Tommy would be extracted during this window, medical emergency requiring immediate hospital admission. Dr. Shaw will receive the boy, Mike stated, reference in his personal physician. Full transfusion, memory modification of the trauma, complete recovery protocol. Marcus outlined the final phase. David will be told the artifact only reveals itself to vampires carrying innocent blood essence, meaning he needs to feed one final time before attempting retrieval. We'll intercept him at the hospital before he reaches his family. And then? Elna asked, though she already knew. Mike's expression hardened into something inhuman, all pretense of humanity stripped away. Then he faces the council, formal tribunal, full covenant protocol. The words carried weight beyond their simplicity. Covenant protocol meant public trial, documented evidence, and if found guilty of crimes against children, the sunlight sentence. Move the family first, Mike commanded. I gave my word to a child that her brother would be safe. That promise is fulfilled before David Robinson learns he's been compromised. His council dispersed like shadows, each moving to execute their portion of the plan with centuries of practiced efficiency. Mike remained alone in the war room, Rachel's notes spread before him on the scarred oak table. Please help us before Tommy dies. I will, he whispered to the empty room, his voice carrying the weight of an oath that transcended mere words. And your father will learn that some debts are paid in blood and sunlight. Outside, night deepened over Ravenwood. The hunt had begun, night 3. St. Mary's Hospital stood abandoned, its halls echoing with decades of suffering now amplified by supernatural silence. David Robinson descended into the basement, flashlight cutting through darkness, heartbeat accelerated with anticipation, still clinging to enough humanity that adrenaline remained even when breath didn't. He'd fed from Tommy 3 hours ago, one final harvest before claiming the power that would elevate him beyond Mike Hunter's laws, beyond consequences. The boy's blood sang through his veins, sweet and potent, making him feel invincible. The basement door opened onto something impossible. The space had been transformed into a formal tribunal chamber. Ancient banners bearing the covenant seal hung from stone walls, candles arranged in ceremonial patterns, casting everything in flickering amber. At the center, elevated on a platform that hadn't existed yesterday, sat Mike Hunter on a throne carved from blackened wood, his presence overwhelming the very air. Around him stood the full council, Elena to his right, Marcus and Vivian flanking the sides, and 12 other vampires David recognized from whispered legends, elders who rarely emerged from their territories, summoned only for the gravest violations. David Robinson. Mike's voice resonated through the chamber with supernatural amplification. You stand accused of violating the covenant laws, specifically Article 1, predation upon children. Article 4, feeding without consent. Article 7, betrayal of coven intelligence to hostile factions. David's supernatural confidence evaporated as the trap's true nature revealed itself. This is illegal assembly. I'm not part of your coven. You have no authority. You became subject to covenant law the moment you were turned, Elena interrupted, her voice ice. Registration is encouraged, but not required for jurisdiction. Your crimes fall under our oldest laws, the ones written in blood when vampires were hunted to near extinction, because rogues like you made us monsters in human eyes. Marcus activated screens behind the tribunal, footage from 17 nights playing simultaneously. David, feeding from Tommy. David, meeting with Sebastian's lieutenants. David, storing stolen blood. David's intercepted messages planning the child's complete exsanguination. I was turned against my will. David's voice cracked with desperation. Abandoned, left to figure this out alone. You expect me to follow laws no one explained? My son's blood called to me. Instinct, not choice. Mike descended from the platform with predatory grace, each step deliberate. You were offered sanctuary. Records show Marcus approached you 2 days after your turning, following the attack that supposedly killed you. You fled rather than accept coven protection and its responsibilities. The boy is my son, my blood. I have rights. You have none. Mike's words cut like blades. The moment you chose predation over parenthood, you forfeited every claim. Tommy Robinson is not your son. He's your victim. And you plan to murder him for power you're too weak to wield. David lunged with desperate vampire speed, claws extended. He was fast. 6 months of feeding from pure blood had enhanced his abilities beyond typical newborn strength. Mike was faster. The Vampire King moved like liquid shadow, catching David mid-strike and slamming him to the stone floor with force that cracked the foundation. 300 years of accumulated power versus 6 months of stolen strength. The outcome was never in doubt. Tribunal finds you guilty on all charges, Mike stated formally, kneeling on David's chest, holding him immobile despite his struggling. Sentence, sunlight execution at dawn. However, his voice dropped lower, carrying unexpected mercy. You may write letters to your family. Truth or lies, confession or goodbye, your final choice is a sentient being. David's struggling ceased as the reality crystallized. They'll know what I am? They'll know you're gone, Elena answered. The content is yours to decide. Die honest or die a liar, we don't care, but die you will. They dragged him to the eastern chamber, a sealed room with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the sunrise, iron restraints bolted to the floor. Paper and pen were provided. David wrote for an hour, tears mixing with ink as dawn approached, writing and rewriting, finally settling on the coward's path. Abandonment, gambling debts, inability to cope with family life, partial truths wrapped around complete lies. As the first rays of sunlight crept across the horizon, Mike stood outside the sealed chamber, watching through protective glass as David Robinson screamed, burned, and crumbled to ash in seconds. The morning light reduced 6 months of predatory existence to dust that would sweep away with the first breeze. In Rachel Robinson's pocket, miles away, a silver coin suddenly grew warm. The promise was kept. Catherine Robinson woke to silence, the absence of her husband's presence registering before consciousness fully formed. The note on the kitchen table was written in David's handwriting, confession and cowardice bleeding through every line, gambling debts to dangerous people, couldn't handle the pressure, needed to disappear for everyone's safety. The lies were crafted perfectly to match abandonment statistics police saw weekly. She called his phone, disconnected. His locker at the hospital, cleaned out, security badge left behind. The police officer who took her report was sympathetic but unsurprised. Ma'am, we see this pattern frequently. Men under financial stress, family obligations, sometimes they just run. But other changes arrive with suspicious timing. Tommy's pediatrician called that afternoon about abnormal blood work requiring immediate specialist consultation, a referral to Dr. Shaw's private clinic. Fully covered through a new pediatric research program studying rare childhood anemia. The first appointment revealed startling improvement. Tommy's color had returned, energy restored. The lethargy vanished as if he'd never been sick. Sometimes these conditions resolve spontaneously. Dr. Shaw explained with practiced ease, his ancient eyes meeting Catherine's with centuries of perfected bedside manner. We'll monitor closely, but I'm optimistic. Whatever was depleting him seems to have stopped. Catherine's hospital administrator called within the week. A promotion to case management coordinator, better hours, substantial raise, excellent benefits. Your dedication hasn't gone unnoticed, Mrs. Robinson. This position offers the work-life balance you need right now. Rachel found the scholarship acceptance in their mailbox. Full tuition to Ravencrest Academy, books and uniforms included, transportation provided. Anonymous donor specifically requested talented students from single-parent households, the admission letter explained. Catherine stood in their small kitchen, surrounded by sudden blessings arriving like perfectly timed miracles, and felt the weight of David's absence shift from abandonment to something closer to relief. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her children, believing it for the first time in months. Rachel said nothing, but the silver coin in her pocket had grown warm 3 days ago, exactly when it promised. She knew what the others didn't. Sometimes monsters saved you from other monsters, and gratitude didn't require full understanding. 6 months later. Tommy was thriving. His laughter echoed through their new house, mysteriously affordable, located in a safe neighborhood near Rachel's school, secured through a rental assistance program Catherine's promotion qualified them for. He'd gained weight, his cheeks pink and healthy. No memory of the dark months when his father's fangs had drained him nightly. Dr. Shaw's memory modification had been thorough and kind. Catherine dated occasionally now, her smile genuine rather than performative. The shadow of David's volatile presence had lifted completely, allowing normal life to finally take root. She'd reconnected with her sister, rebuilt friendships David had systematically isolated her from, started taking evening walks without checking over her shoulder. Rachel occasionally glimpsed them, Marcus watching from the soccer field bleachers during her games, his presence protective rather than threatening. Elena at parent-teacher conferences introduced as a school benefactor, with interest in Rachel's academic progress. Vivian ensuring their digital footprint remained clean. David's disappearance buried under layers of plausible documentation that discouraged further investigation. At school, teachers noted Rachel's transformation. The hypervigilance had faded gradually, replaced by the cautious optimism of a child learning to trust safety. Her grades, already strong from premature maturity, improved further as energy previously spent on survival redirected toward simply being 9 years old. One evening, walking home from debate club practice, the familiar black car appeared. The rear window lowered, revealing Mike Hunter's face, unchanged and unchanging. "Your brother is well," he stated rather than asked, those amber eyes studying her for confirmation. Rachel nodded. "The doctors say he doesn't remember anything bad, just that Dad left." Something like satisfaction softened Mike's severe features. "Good. Some truths are burdens children shouldn't carry." "But I carry it," Rachel said quietly, not accusatory but observant. "Yes," Mike acknowledged. "Because you chose to. That makes you different." The car pulled away smoothly, leaving Rachel on the sidewalk with questions forming in her young mind. Questions about justice, protection, and the complicated nature of monsters who kept promises. That night, Catherine excitedly shared news about Tommy's perfect health screening. Rachel accepted the miracle with practiced surprise, and somewhere in Blackwood Manor, Mike Hunter filed away reports confirming the Robinson family's continued stability. Some investments he'd learned paid dividends beyond power or wealth. Sometimes they returned something far more valuable, the reminder that protection could be purpose, and purpose could be redemption. Rachel's 9th birthday arrived on the first day of spring. The package appeared on their doorstep wrapped in black velvet, no return address, sealed with crimson wax bearing a symbol Rachel recognized, the crown of thorns and chalice from the silver coin she kept hidden in her jewelry box. Inside lay an antique journal, leather-bound and ancient, its pages blank and waiting. A note in elegant script accompanied it. "For recording your story. Some debts create legacies rather than obligations. You showed courage when it mattered most. That is never forgotten. M.H." Catherine assumed it was a gift from Rachel's school, another kindness from the mysterious benefactors who'd transformed their lives. Rachel said nothing to correct her, running her fingers over leather that had survived centuries, feeling the weight of acknowledgement from someone who understood exactly what she'd done. 3 months later, Sosway, on a warm June evening, a formal invitation arrived, addressed specifically to Rachel Robinson in that same elegant handwriting. Catherine read it aloud with excitement. Ravencrest Academy's summer scholarship program invites exceptional students to an exclusive evening lecture series on Gothic literature and historical folklore. The black car arrived at sunset, Marcus driving with professional courtesy, delivering Rachel not to the school but to Blackwood Manor's gates, this time opened wide in welcome. The dining hall took Rachel's breath away. Cathedral ceilings soared overhead, chandeliers floating without support casting prismatic light across a table set for 20. Vampires of varying ages occupied seats, their conversations pausing as Mike Hunter rose from the head of the table. Rachel Robinson, His voice carried formal weight. "You are here because you demonstrated something my kind has forgotten to value. Courage without power, trust without guarantee, and the willingness to bet everything on a stranger's honor." He gestured to an empty seat at his right hand, the position of respect, Elena moving gracefully to accommodate the human child among immortal predators. "You are under my protection," Mike continued, his words resonating with supernatural weight that made them binding contract. "No vampire, werewolf, witch, or demon in this territory or beyond may harm you. You bear the mark of the Covenant's favor." Elena presented a velvet box. Inside lay a silver pendant, delicate chain holding a small shield engraved with the Covenant seal, a single ruby at its center that pulsed with faint warmth. "This identifies you as protected," Elena explained, fastening it around Rachel's neck with surprising gentleness. "Any supernatural creature will recognize it. You remain human, remain yourself, but you walk in safety." Rachel touched the pendant, feeling magic humming beneath the metal. "Why? You kept your promise. My family is safe. Your debt is paid." Mike's expression shifted, something ancient and surprisingly vulnerable flickering across his features. "Because I'm building something new. For 2 centuries I've ruled through fear and force, necessary but insufficient. The supernatural world needs witnesses, humans who know we exist, who can identify rogues before they create more victims like Tommy." He leaned forward, amber eyes intense with purpose. "When you're older, if you choose, there's a position waiting. Human liaison to the Covenant Council, voice for those who cannot speak to us directly, bridge between our world and yours. You'd trust a human with that power?" Rachel asked, her 9-year-old mind grasping the implications. "I'd trust the girl who valued her brother's life over her own safety," Mike replied simply. "Who approached a monster with nothing but courage and $10. That kind of character is rarer than immortality." The dinner that followed was surreal. Vampires discussing art, politics, history with casual references to events they'd personally witnessed. They treated Rachel not as prey or curiosity, but as an honored guest, answering her questions about their world with surprising honesty. As Marcus drove her home later, the pendant warm against her chest, Rachel stared out at Ravenwood's streets with new eyes. The world was larger than she'd imagined, darker but also more nuanced. Monsters existed, but so did monster hunters who sometimes wore the same faces. 1 year after that first midnight meeting, Rachel stood again at Blackwood Manor's gates, but this time invited, expected, walking through with confidence earned rather than borrowed. Mike waited in his garden among night-blooming flowers, Elena beside him reviewing reports on tablet. They looked up as Rachel approached, her pendant catching moonlight. "Your grades are exceptional," Mike noted, approval evident. "Dr. Shaw says your brother is thriving. Your mother is dating someone appropriate." Marcus verified his background. "You're still watching over us," Rachel observed, not quite a question. "Always," Mike confirmed without hesitation. "Some investments require long-term attention." Elena's lips curved slightly. "You're getting sentimental in your old age." Mike's response carried unexpected warmth. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm finally remembering why we protect humanity. Because occasionally they remind us what courage actually means, what honor demands, what redemption costs." He turned to Rachel, his expression serious. "You'll face choices ahead. To walk between worlds isn't easy. You'll see things others don't, carry secrets that isolate. The offer stands, but understand, this path changes you." Rachel touched her pendant, thinking of Tommy's laughter, her mother's genuine smiles, the safety they'd found through her desperate gamble. You changed our lives with violence and control. I want to change lives differently. But I'll need to understand your world to do it. Wisdom beyond your years, Elena murmured appreciatively. Mike extended his hand, not to shake, but palm up, an offer of partnership between unequals that acknowledged mutual respect. Then learn. Watch. When you're ready, the position awaits. Until then, live your life, Rachel Robinson. Childhood shouldn't be sacrificed to responsibility, even earned responsibility. Rachel placed her small hand in his cold one, the contract form not through desperation this time, but choice. Thank you, Mr. Hunter, for keeping promises monsters shouldn't have to keep. His grip tightened briefly, gently. Thank you for reminding me that some promises are worth keeping. As she walked home under Elena's discreet protection, Rachel Robinson carried her journal, wore her pendant, and understood something profound. The world wasn't divided into heroes and monsters. It was filled with complicated souls making choices between darkness and light, between power and protection, between what was easy and what was right. And sometimes $10 and a child's courage were worth more than centuries of gold because they purchased something immortals had forgotten existed: redemption.